Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. This lecture is on the greatest sacrifices of all time. And it seems like a few people fell for it. They're like, oh, I want to watch that lecture. Now this won't be the lecture you learn the most from, but it'll be the most fun. And I want to thank our sponsor, Chris Stone Street, aka Stonemeister 1968 of the MHS Chess Club. Go Stone Street. And so if you would like to sponsor a lecture, contact my wife, Karen. Her email is karen@atlchessclub.com. And then you can sponsor a lecture about any topic of your choosing. I mean, within reason. Okay, so obviously any lecture on the greatest sacrifices is going to be subjective. And I actually left a couple out because I've lectured on them a few times already. So, I mean, one of them I lectured on last week. It happened to be part of the lecture that I was doing. So there might be a couple that you know that aren't here, and hopefully at least half of them you don't know. That's my goal, is you don't know some of them. Okay, the first one is one of the most famous. It's Levitsky, who I don't know who that is. And he's playing Frank Marshall. I know who that is. And this was played in 1912. And Marshall's winning this position, but he actually isn't up any material. Okay, so black is threatening rook takes queen with advantage. So white made, I don't want to say it's a terrible move because he's losing. So, I mean, every move loses. Okay, he played queen g5 because his queen's attacked. And Marshall played a relatively obvious sacrifice here. Because the pawn on g2 is overworked. It's defending the bishop and it's defending f3. So if the pawn wasn't there, then black would have the option of taking the bishop for free, or the better option of knight f3 check, forking the king and the queen, and the rook. So Marshall took care of that by playing rook takes h3. And that's not the sacrifice that I have in mind as the greatest sacrifice. That's the preamble to the actual sacrifice that's great. And in this position, white played a sort of a strange move. Obviously, if he takes the rook, knight f3 check wins his queen. And if he doesn't take the rook, he's down a piece. He just lost a bishop. So he's lost. So he tried, but as you all know, trying is the first step to failure. Levitsky played rook c5. Now, that seems to delay the inevitable. Black could move his queen anywhere, and then you still can't take the rook because of knight f3 check. So rook c5 doesn't do too much. It attacks the queen. However, it allowed Marshall to make one of the most famous moves ever, which most of you should be familiar with. And if you're not, it's going to be really exciting for you now. The first time you see this is very exciting. The 20th time you see it, I've seen it 19 times before. Okay, and here Marshall played unnecessary sacrifice that wins brilliantly. It's an amazing move. And that move is queen g3. It's very unexpected. And there's an old story, an apocryphal story, obviously. When the move was played, the spectators threw gold coins on the board. Okay, but the true story is more likely that people had bet on the game and they were just paying each other because black's going to win now. So we'll just say they threw gold coins on the board because they liked the move so much, whether it's true or not. Okay, and in this position, white resigned. Now, black is up a piece and black is threatening queen takes h2 mate. So probably white should capture the queen. Okay, instead of capturing the queen, white gave up. But let's see what happens. If you take with the h pawn, knight e2 is checkmate. So that's not good for white. If you take with the f pawn, knight e2 check, and rook takes f1 mate. So that's not good either. If you take with the queen, I play knight e2 check, knight g3 check, and you can't take with the h pawn because it's illegal. And if you take with the f pawn, you get mated in 1. So you should play king g1. Now black has 2 ways to win easily. Black could play knight check and then move the rook, and black's up a piece for nothing. They'll move the rook anywhere. Or black could take the rook, you take the rook, and then escape with his knight on d2. And once again, black is up a piece for nothing. So that's the best white can do, is go into the piece down ending. So after queen g3, instead he resigned. Queen g3 wasn't necessary to win, but it certainly was the coolest move. And maybe one of the coolest moves ever played, because it's so unlikely that somebody would play queen g3 in that position. And it's a very famous move, very famous game. Okay, go Marshall. Okay, we are Marshall. Okay, then let's go to game 2. This is also a very famous game. And this is the game Lasker Thomas from 1912. And you have to realize that this is not world champion Emanuel Lasker. This is Edward Lasker, who was much weaker than Emanuel Lasker, but still he was a good player, just, as a world champion strength. And he's playing George Allen Thomas, who was a top 5 British player for many years. And they're playing in London. And in this position, Lasker played queen h5. Now, the point of queen h5, welcome to the class. Okay, make sure you mute yourself and so forth. You only missed one position, but in 2 weeks you can see it on YouTube. Okay, and then in this position, white is threatening knight takes f6 check, which unleashes the white bishop, and then queen takes h7 would be check or checkmate. So if black makes a random legal move, a6, we take. I tried to admit, but it went away. What happened? Already admitted. Very suspicious. Okay, then if black takes on f6 with something, then I play queen h7, which sometimes is mate and sometimes leads to mate, but it's completely winning for white. Okay, so Thomas decided to defend h7 indirectly by playing queen e7. And his idea is, if you take the bishop with check and I take with the g pawn, my queen is defending h7. So then black is, okay. So queen e7 defends against white's threat of knight f6 and queen h7. Luckily, we have a brilliant sacrifice, which is also very famous. I'm not sure what's more famous, the first one with Levitsky Marshall or this one. Again, if you've never seen them, it's super exciting. Okay, and we have to stop the game because it's too exciting. Okay, white played brilliant queen sacrifice, queen h7 check. And black has one legal move, so he played it. And then white played double check. So the knight and the bishop are checking the king. Black has 2 legal moves. If you play king h8, knight g6 is mate, which is pretty. Okay, so black played king h6, and white checked on g4. Black has 1 legal move, king g5. White played h4 check. Black has 1 legal move, king f4. White played g3 check. Black has 1 legal move, king f3. Bishop e2 check. Black has 1 legal move, king g2. Rook h2 check. Black has 1 legal move, king g1. And now white has 2 checkmates in 1. He chose the one that was less cool. That's why he wasn't Emanuel Lasker. He was simply Edward Lasker. He played king d2 checkmate, discovered checkmate. Notice the rook is checking the king. A better move, would have been long castle mate. You don't get to castle with mate ever. So this would have been the only chance to do it. Nobody ever castles with mate. So chance to castle with mate. But king d2 is also mate, and it's a discovered attack with moving the kings. That's pretty good too. And the only time after the queen sacrifice that black had more than one legal move was this position. Black had two legal moves, but one of them hung mate in one. So Lasker could calculate the variation pretty easily because black didn't have any choice. If black has 5 or 10 choices per move, nobody can calculate that except an engine. And in 1912, the engines were terrible. Even the ones in the cars, terrible. Okay, so that's a famous thing because black's king walks all the way to the end of the board and gets checkmated. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let's go to the next greatest sacrifices ever. Okay, and this game is not famous unless you've watched my lectures, then you've probably seen it. This wouldn't be in anybody else's greatest sacrifices because it's my game. But I get to throw one of my games in because it's my lecture. So I threw one of mine in. Okay, and this is my greatest sacrifice. So, although in my game with Fidel Corrales, I made another interesting sacrifice that I could have included, but I wanted to include this one and not two of them because two is too much. Okay, so I took back on d5, and this is a position where black is slightly better. Black has nice knights in the center, and white's pawn on f3 isn't very good. Okay, and my opponent didn't want me to take his bishop, so he played bishop g5. He was hoping we would trade bishops on g5. And then that's better than me winning a bishop for a knight, because then I wouldn't have a dark square bishop to destroy him. Okay, and this is where I made a very unusual move, so that's why I like the sacrifice so much. And it's sort of spoiled because my sacrifice was declined. So that sort of spoils the greatest sacrifice because the guy didn't take it. And I played the move knight d3 check. That's probably the craziest looking move I've ever played. And even crazier, especially if you haven't seen this before, is my opponent played king f1. You didn't see that coming. Okay, let's look at all three ways of taking the knight. If you take with the pawn, bishop b4 wins your queen because you can't play c3. If I had played bishop b4 on the previous move, my opponent would have played c3. So that does nothing. But after knight d3 check, if he takes with the c pawn, he can't play c3, so bishop b4 wins his queen. Okay. If he takes with the queen, he's simply undefending his bishop on g5. So now I got his bishop for my knight, the other knight, and now I control all the dark squares, and his position's quite bad here. And if he takes with the bishop, then we will see the latent potential of my queen. Queen e5 check, forking the king and the bishop on g5. And bishop e3 doesn't save his bishop because my knight's here. So again, I would win his bishop for my knight. So he played king f1, and the game continued knight f4, trying to get one of his bishops. He traded bishops. And then the rest of the game doesn't really feature any sacrifices, but it features a nice move later. So I'll show you what he did wrong. In this position, he blundered with queen d6, and I played knight f5 because I want my knight to go here, and I want to take his queen, so he had to go back. And now he loses material because knight e3 check wins the exchange, and queen b2 wins a pawn. He decided to save the exchange. And there's a very funny part in this game right here where I played rook c8, so he automatically played rook c1, challenged the file. And when I take the rook, just like earlier when I played knight d3 sacrifice and he had three ways to capture, he has three ways to capture the rook, but they all lose material. If he takes with the rook, I just take on b3, and I'm 2 connected pass pawns ahead, plus his king is exposed, plus he has an isolated pawn. If he takes with the knight, that's even worse. I play queen f3 check. That's no good. And so he took with the queen, and I take on a2. I'm 2 pawns up again. And in this position, he resigned because my bishop's better than his knight. I have 2 connected pass pawns. I'm 2 pawns up. This is weak. His king is weak. So he gave up here. So that was my greatest sacrifice, knight d3, but it wasn't accepted. So that's why nobody knows about it. Okay. To continue on, this is a very famous one too. And actually, there's been a lot of repeats of this in similar positions. Maybe not the same position, but the same tactic. So if you have a tactics book, or you do tactics on the internet, either with Lee Chess or chess.com or Chess Tempo or other chess sites I don't know about, this is going to pop up a lot. This is a fan favorite. Okay, so white is attacking black's queen, and this is Richard Réti as white versus Savielly Tartakower. Those players were both top 20 in the world, so played in 1910. Black played queen takes e5, and now the knight's pinned and attacked twice, and so forth. So normally you would expect white to defend the knight, and the only way to do that, I think, is f3. But Richard Réti, even in 1910, knew never play f3. I don't know how he knew it, he just knew it. So he castled long, and now black has 2 ways to capture on e4. And actually, the best move is to not capture on e4, but Tartakower didn't see why. Should have been more suspicious. Takes with the queen, rook e1 wins the queen. So he saw that. Okay, Tartakower saw rook e1. So he played knight takes e4, which is a terrible blunder. He probably should play something like knight bd7. Okay, and in this position, this is a known tactic now, mainly because of this game. So all the greatest sacrifices, you've seen the ideas because the games were played and they became famous. So it's hard. I can't really show you the greatest sacrifice ever. You've never seen it before because those games are famous. That's why they're the greatest sacrifices ever. And this is one of the famous ones. Richard Réti played queen d8 check, confusing the audience. Okay, and the idea is we have double discovered check when he takes the queen, which he has to. And we play bishop g5 check, and this is double check. And when you're in double check, you have to move your king, and every time. Now black has 2 legal moves, king e8 and king c7. Okay, he played king c7. If he plays king e8, it's reminiscent of Morphy beating the count and the duke in the opera game, rook d8 checkmate. You've seen this mate before, and so Tartakower played king c7, and now we have another mate, which is very unusual, bishop d8 mate. You don't see that mate very often with that kind of construction. That's very unusual. Now obviously, Réti saw this mate when he castled queenside. Otherwise he wouldn't have castled queenside. So he saw that knight takes and queen takes both lost. Tartakower didn't analyze queen d8 check properly, or completely missed it, or was expecting rook e1, which also looks reasonable, but didn't look at queen d8. That's pretty easy now for top players because we've seen this before. So once you do it in 1910, we know about it later. But at the time, nobody knew about it. So that's a beautiful checkmate with the bishop. I'm glad he played king c7. King e8 rook, king e8 rook d8, I've seen that before. This one, pretty new.
Quick question, would bishop a5 not have worked instead of bishop g5?
That's correct. Bishop a5 would not have worked because the bishop on g5 was controlling these 2 squares, so e7 wouldn't be controlled. After bishop a5, nothing is controlling e7. So bishop has to control e7. because otherwise after king e8, rook d8, king e7. But sometimes in some puzzles, in some games, it is bishop a5. It depends on where the pieces are. It could be like if white's pawn, let me go back. Let's see if I can go back, if I can figure out how. That's going to be impossible. I think I'll just go forward a lot, and like the world will reconnect. Okay, so yeah, in this position, if, for example, this pawn was on e7, just move that pawn to e7 in your mind. Then it is bishop a5 check. Then king e8, rook d8 mate. So it depends on where things are, but since e7 isn't covered, we have to play bishop g5 check. But it could be bishop a5 check if the position was slightly different. But okay, here it's bishop g5. Well, good question. Okay, this is a Tal game against NN. And throughout history, NN loses every game. Terrible. And he's hundreds of years old. He's been losing games for hundreds of years. So whoever NN is, he's got to up his game. Okay, now this game, Tal sacrifices every move. So it's not the greatest sacrifice ever. It's the greatest series of consecutive sacrifices, each more crazy than the last. All right, so NN played bishop b7, developing his bishop. Sounds good. Sicilian, get your bishop out. Okay, and then Tal said, but I'm Tal. So he sacrifices his knight on e6, because that's what Tal does. Takes. Queen g4, threatening queen takes e6, which is going to be checkmate, because bishop e7, then queen takes mate. So we have to stop queen takes e6 check. We can't allow that. So he played queen b6. That defends e6. So he must have heard me. Okay, and then Tal said, what time is it? And the guy said, I don't know. And Tal said, it's time to sacrifice some more. Rook d6. That blocks the queen from the e-pawn that I was just telling you about. Okay, so the guy took it because now the king can go to f8. Queen e6 isn't mate. So queen e6, king f8. And then Tal said, it's time to sacrifice again. I've only made 2 sacrifices in the last 3 moves. So he played bishop c4, threatening queen f7 mate with advantage. Queen f7 mate is annoying. And the reason he played bishop c4, which is hanging, is he opens up the f1 square for his rook. So the guy took the bishop, rook f1 check. The only way to stop mate, like you can stop mate for a few moves by throwing all your pieces away with check, but he played knight f6. And Tal said, I'm not done sacrificing yet. Always sacrifice the exchange. And played rook takes f6 check. So he sacrificed his knight, then he sacrificed his rook, then he sacrificed his bishop, and then he sacrificed the exchange. Okay, and he did it like in 7 moves. He made 4 sacrifices, or 6 moves. And then after takes, bishop h6 mate. Amazing. So I don't think he saw this when he played knight takes c6, but I'll bet he saw it when he played rook d6. Then he saw that he would just keep sacrificing and mate the guy. Yeah, we don't know who that guy was because he's NN.
Quick question, is this from an exhibition? Was it blindfold?
Probably it was from a simultaneous, I would bet, which is even more impressive. I don't know if it was blindfold, it probably would say so. Blindfold, this seems hard to do, to make all these sacrifices like this. But I guess Tal could have done that. Probably it was a simultaneous exhibition. Some of Tal's best sacrifices were in simuls, because his opponents weren't, super famous. Okay, this one is the one you're going to like the most. I have spoken. If you don't like it the most, then you didn't listen to me. Okay, let's flip the board. This is the game, I can't pronounce White's last name, Reinisch. Reinisch might be correct, against Traxler. And you might say, Traxler, I've heard of Traxler, and that's because there's an opening called the Traxler. It's in the two knights, and this was the Traxler. This is the opening that's named after him. This is it. And it should look familiar to you if you know the Traxler, because this is obviously a Traxler variation based on where the pieces are. So black likes to sacrifice, and white likes to take black's pieces. That's how the Traxler works. So usually the better player wins, because you have to know when to sacrifice and when to take free pieces. Okay, in this position, white could already take the queen, but he probably thought taking on c4 would lead to a checkmate eventually, so he just saved his bishop. And then he figured black would save his queen, and then he would have a rook to capture on h8. And black said, I sacrificed my queen last move, let's sacrifice it again. Knight takes e4, sacrificing his knight. And obviously, king takes e4 looks a little suicidal, because we have queen h4 check, and we have bishop b7 check, and that don't look good. Okay, and he said, okay, I'll take the queen. So white's up a queen, and if black sacrificed the queen and then made it in one or two moves, that wouldn't be one of the greatest sacrifices ever. That's sort of, it's okay. Okay, but black continued to sacrifice all of his pieces. And again, it's a series of sacrifices, starting with the queen. Knight c5 check. White has one legal move, king c3. Knight e2 check, sacrificing the knight just to gain access to d4. So white can take the knight or play king b4. So, I would take the knight. Okay, bishop d4 check, and he plays king b4. a5 check. Now, white has two legal moves. If he plays king a3, b4 is mate. So that would be a bad legal move. That's not good. Okay, so he played king takes b5, bishop a6 check, the only one legal move, king takes a5, bishop d3 check, not bishop takes queen check. Okay, bishop d3, slightly more accurate. Bishop takes queen check also wins, but this is cuter. Okay, so now white has one legal move again, king to b4, knight a6 check, and the bishops stop the white king from coming up here. The bishop stops king b5, so the king has to go to the a file. Okay, so he moved his king to the a file, and then black hasn't sacrificed in a couple of moves, so knight b4 check. In fact, it doesn't matter where the king was going to go. It was going to be knight b4 check at some point. And he took the knight, and then c5 is checkmate. So, bishop takes queen would have been fine, but that's less interesting if black's not down a queen. I want to see, this position, not with the bishop here and white's not a queen up. So in the Traxler variation, sometimes white takes all of black's pieces and black has no pieces. And sometimes white's king gets mated. Those are the more exciting games. When black loses in the Traxler, you just shake your head and you're like, why'd you play the Traxler? That loses all your pieces. But when black wins with the Traxler, then it's beautiful because white takes all of black's pieces and black checkmates white. So, super grandmasters don't like the Traxler for black. Although there was a game between Baliovsky and Anand where Anand played the Traxler and won with black. So it's possible. It's unlikely. But the stranger things have happened. Anyway, really nice game. Go to the next sacrifice. Okay, and this is very famous sacrifice. And actually, personally, there's another Byrne Fischer game with another Byrne. This is Donald Byrne, and Fischer has a famous game with Robert Byrne where he makes much more complicated sacrifices. But this is a famous game because Fischer was only 13 years old at the time, and he sacrificed his queen. When he played Robert Byrne, he was already the best player in the US, and he sacrificed a piece. for compensation that was hard to understand. Then when the game ended, you understood it. But I like that sacrifice more. But this is one for the people. The people like this game better. There's nothing I can do. Okay, so in this position, it's white's turn. If white takes the knight, black plays rook e8, and he's going to win the bishop. And then, let's say, for example, white castles, and we take, then black's up a pawn, white has 2 isolated pawns, and black has 2 bishops. So white's not going to do that. Okay, so in this position, white played bishop c5, attacking the black queen. And he's hoping the queen moves away, and then he plays queen takes knight. And white's up a piece. Hooray! Okay, so Fischer played rook e8 check, and Donald Byrne played king f1, and he was like, man, I'm attacking his queen, I'm attacking his knight, and there's nothing he can do about it. And Fischer made an amazingly spectacular move, especially considering he was 13. But if he was the world champion, this would still be an amazing move. 13 is like, it's unbelievable that he played this move. And this is, again, one of the most famous sacrifices. And it took a long time to finish the game off, but he played the move bishop e6, ignoring his queen and his knight. And the idea is, I want to play bishop takes c4 check. If you play bishop takes e6, now the bishop isn't on c4 anymore, so we have queen b5 check. And now black is obviously winning because king e1 hangs mate in 1, so that's bad. And if play king here, I check. And more than one thing wins, but you have to win this way. If king e1, this is still mate, and it's double check, so we play king g1, and then you play queen f1 check, and knight e2 mate. You have to do that. You don't have to do that to win, but you have to do that to make the game special. Okay, so I've just shown you why white can't play bishop takes e6. Okay, now I'm going to show you why he shouldn't play queen takes c3. Now white's up a piece, but notice the bishop here pinning the d pawn, so I can play queen takes c5. Now black is threatening c4, black has 2 bishops, black's up a pawn, so we take, bishop takes, black is a pawn up, and white has 2 isolated pawns, and white's rook on h1 has a lot of trouble getting out. This is the best white could have done, and this isn't good. It's the best he can do, but it's lost. Okay, so he played the obvious move after bishop e6. He took the queen. Okay, then bishop takes c4 check, king g1, knight e2 check, king f1. Now black has all kinds of discovered double, quadruple checks. Takes the pawn with check, checks again, knight c3 check, and then takes the bishop, threatening the queen and threatening the rook, and the bishop protects the knight. And you can't protect your rook with queen c1 because knight e2 check wins your queen. Okay, so it's a tough position. Even though we have 2 pieces for a queen, black's threatening everything. Black can go back and do this discovered check thing again, take a rook, take a queen. So white's in a lot of trouble. So he played queen b4, and then rook a4. He didn't want to take the rook and then lose his bishop, which is winning for black probably, but he defended his bishop first. Then he'll take the rook later. Queen takes b6, and he takes the rook, and now black is up a lot of material. Black has a rook and 2 bishops for a queen. And also, this is no good. King and rook are no good. And black has 2 bishops, and so forth. So black is completely winning here, and he won very nicely. So we'll look at the rest of the game. h3 getting luffed. Black just took everything. And white has a rook, 2 bishops, and 3 pawns for a queen. That's unheard of how much material that is. And eventually, black's pieces had their say. And you can see this isn't working out for white. Checkmate. I mean, black was completely winning the last like 15 moves of the game, but it was nice to checkmate using all 4 pieces. And just to realize how much black was winning, bishop a3 is also checkmate. I mean, black's really winning, and white has no threats. It can never have any threats. So yeah, 4 pieces, checkmated a king. That's a very famous Fischer game because he played bishop e6, sacrificing his queen, and he did it when he was 13. They're both in, each one is amazing. If he wasn't 13, it's still amazing. But the fact that he was 13 is incredible. I'm not sure if I have one more or not. I guess we'll find out. We do. Okay, good. I knew this was the last one, but I forgot. Okay, now this game, there was a funny video made by Grandmaster Tal Byrne, who was kicked off of chess.com in shame, but that's another story. That's for my private students, that story. Okay, and Tal Byrne is a grandmaster from Israel, and he did some commentary on his Twitch channel, like for certain events, and he was doing live commentary for this game, which was a rapid game following the World Championship match between Carlsen and Karjakin. They tied 6-6. Then they had a rapid playoff. And this was the rapid playoff. This was the last game. So whoever won this game is world champion. So important game. Okay. And it was 2016. And Carlsen has white. And Carlsen's up the exchange for no pawns. So that's good. Okay, and in this position, I mean, Karjakin can trade queens, but white's going to win the endgame with an extra exchange. So he tried to attack Magnus. Rook a2 check, king h1, queen f2. And during the live commentary from Tal Byrne, he said, well, black's threatening queen g2 mate, because black's threatening queen g2 mate. And so white should stop it. And he had some suggestions. He was like, I could play queen g3, I could play rook g1, and I could play queen g4, but I'm not sure which one's the best. Like, he said you could do those, but he didn't know technically what the engine would say, because he wasn't using an engine, he was using his brain. Okay, if you're doing analysis of World Championship game, typically your brain's not good enough, but the engine is. The engine's good at analyzing World Championship games. Anyway, we're very lucky that Carlsen did not win in a mundane manner, okay, like with rook g1 or queen g3, something where he'd win an endgame in like 20 more moves. Okay, instead, he played a rook c8 check, confusing Tal Byrne. He was very confused. And the obvious idea, if bishop f8, always play bishop f8, is we sacrifice on f8, and then we check. If you go this way, you get mated very quickly. Rook h8 mate, or queen g6 mate, whichever mate you prefer. And if you go the other way, you also get checkmated. Rook check, king here, queen check. Black only has one legal move. And okay, then mate next move. Well, maybe 2 moves. If you play king c8, I go here, and king d8, I go here. Okay, so black's getting mated first because every move is check and you can't escape. Okay, so Tal Byrne was confused because he knew bishop f8 was losing to rook f8, but he didn't understand what to do after king h7, and he was just baffled. He's like, what is Magnus doing? Magnus just let these back rank checkmates happen and queen g2 mate. Black's threatening 3 different checkmates here, or 4 different checkmates. 1, 2, 3, 4. Although rook a1 isn't checkmate because of rook c1. So he's only threatening 3 checkmates in 1. So Tal Byrne is like, what did Magnus do with rook c8? Ridiculous. How could he do such a thing when he has all these simple ways to simplify the position and win in a sort of a boring way. And then Magnus said, "You will know my name is the Lord when I play the following move." I wonder if he actually said that. He's definitely thinking it. He played the move. Does anybody in the chat already seen this game or never seen the game or wants to suggest a move?
Queen H6, right? Queen H6.
Yeah. Queen H6. And Tal Byrne sat there like this. Oh my God, I should have seen that. I didn't see it, but I should have seen it. That's what he said. Okay, and after Queen H6, Karjakin resigned. And playing Queen H6 to retain the world championship, that's pretty amazing. You don't get to play a move like that ever, then to play it to become world champion, that's deserved. If you take with the king, Rook H8 is checkmate with advantage. And if you take with the G pawn, Rook F7 is checkmate. So obviously, Magnus saw Queen H6 when he played Rook C8, because if he doesn't play Queen H6, he's going to lose. Black's winning. Black has mate everywhere. So obviously he saw it. Tal Byrne didn't see it, so he thought Magnus went nuts. Losing the world championship with a crazy move, and then getting the world championship back with the move that he already saw. So a brilliant finish. Great game for Magnus, great finish. And that game should end our lecture, because not only was it a brilliant sacrifice and unexpected, and a funny video was made by Tal Byrne, but it's a move that made him become world champion again. So you don't get to play a brilliant move to win the world championship ever. So this was a great example of that. Anyway, I want to thank our sponsor again, Chris Stonestreet. He's Stone Meister 1968. Don't forget it. Thanks for sponsoring our lecture. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment for those of you on YouTube. And stay tuned. Every Monday, we have more lectures here in my beautiful basement. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.